The night of June 23, 1944, mid-Atlantic, 850 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Lieutenant Commander Jesse Taylor banked his TBF Avenger through darkness so complete that the ocean below merged seamlessly with the sky above. His radar operator, Chief Ed Whitlock, hunched over the pale green glow of his radar scope, watching the sweep arm paint ghostly returns across the screen. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Then, at 23:40 hours, a blip, contact, surfaced submarine, range approximately 6 miles. Taylor didn't need to check his intelligence briefing again. He knew what was down there. The Japanese submarine I-52, a 350-foot cargo submarine carrying 2.2 tons of gold, tungsten, molybdenum, and passengers bound for Nazi Germany. The largest transoceanic trade mission ever attempted by the Imperial Japanese Navy. And in exactly 90 seconds after Taylor illuminated that submarine with his first flare, the boat's crew would either be diving toward safety or sailing toward oblivion. The mathematics of submarine hunting had always been cruel. A surfaced submarine could spot an aircraft and initiate a crash dive in less than 30 seconds with a well-trained crew. Once the dive began, the submarine descended at roughly 2 feet per second, reaching 100 feet depth in under a minute. At 100 feet, the boat became difficult to track with surface sonar. At 150 feet, it entered a depth where conventional aerial depth charges struggled to reach effectively. The deeper it dove, the safer it became. But Taylor carried something the Japanese didn't know existed. Something so secret that even its name was classified. The Mark 24 mine. The designation itself was deception. It wasn't a mine at all. It was the first successful acoustic homing torpedo in history, and the US Navy had worked desperately to keep its existence hidden from every Axis power since its first combat use in May 1943. The weapon's development had begun in December 1941, just days after Pearl Harbor, when the National Defense Research Committee convened an emergency meeting at Harvard University's Underwater Sound Laboratory. The challenge seemed nearly impossible at the time. Create an aerial torpedo that could track a submarine not by sight, not by magnetic signature, but by listening to the sound of its propellers churning through water. Make it small enough to fit existing bomb racks. Make it simple enough for mass production, and make it work well enough to justify the enormous technical and financial investment required. 2 teams worked in parallel. Harvard's Underwater Sound Laboratory pursued one approach to acoustic guidance. Bell Telephone Laboratories pursued another. Both teams shared information completely, racing not against each other but against time itself. Western Electric developed a lightweight lead-acid battery that could deliver 110 amps for 15 minutes without weighing down the weapon. General Electric designed electric motors and explored active sonar homing systems. The David Taylor Model Basin assisted with hydrodynamics and propulsion testing. By July 1942, barely 7 months after the project began, both guidance systems had demonstrated successful acoustic homing in test runs. The Bell Laboratories proportional steering system was selected for production. The Torpedo's body was a modified Mark 13 torpedo. Shortened, its diameter reduced, weight cut down to 680 pounds. The nose section was hemispherical to house the 92-pound HBX explosive charge. 4 hydrophones were mounted around the torpedo's midsection, connected to a vacuum tube-based sound processing system that seemed impossibly sophisticated for 1942. The Navy was so confident, or so desperate, that production orders went out in June 1942, even before airdrop testing had been completed. The first production models reached operational squadrons in March 1943. Each torpedo cost $1,800, expensive by wartime standards, but cheap compared to losing convoy ships worth millions. The weapon worked on principles that seem simple in retrospect, but were revolutionary at the time. Upon entering the water, the torpedo dove to a preset depth, initially 50 feet, later changed to 150 feet. It began a circular search pattern, swimming in wide arcs, listening. 4 piezoelectric hydrophones detected sounds at 24 kHz, the frequency range where submarine propellers generated the most noise. When the signal from those hydrophones exceeded a predetermined threshold, the acoustic homing system engaged. The torpedo turned toward the loudest sound source. If the target was to the left hydrophone received stronger signals, and the torpedo's rudder deflected left. If the target was to the right, the rudder deflected right. The system was proportional. Stronger signals meant harder rudder deflections. The torpedo spiraled inward on the sound source, following an inexorable acoustic trail that led directly to the submarine's propellers. There was a critical limitation that became one of the weapon's most closely guarded secrets. The torpedo traveled at only 12 knots. That speed was sufficient to catch any submerged submarine, which struggled to exceed 8 or 9 knots underwater. But any surfaced submarine could outrun the torpedo easily, achieving 15 to 20 knots on diesel engines. If a submarine captain knew about the slow speed, he could simply stay on the surface and run. If he didn't know, instinct would tell him to dive for safety, and diving meant slowing down, and slowing down meant acoustic torpedo would catch him. The deception extended to the weapon's designation. Calling it the Mark 24 mine instead of a torpedo served two purposes. It concealed the weapon's true nature from enemy intelligence services, and it kept the weapon away from the Navy's torpedo development bureaucracy, which was already overwhelmed trying to fix the catastrophically defective Mark 14 torpedo that had plagued American submarines for the first 2 years of the war. The first confirmed kill came in May 1943. The exact date remains disputed, either May 13th or May 14th, depending on which engagement report you trust. A.U.S. Navy Catalina flying boat or an RAF Coastal Command Liberator attacked and sank either U-657 or U-640. A second U-boat, U-456, was damaged on May 13th and sank the following day from cumulative damage. The weapon worked. More importantly, it worked far better than conventional depth charges. Statistical analysis conducted after the war revealed the stark effectiveness gap. Aircraft-dropped depth charges achieved approximately a 9.5% kill probability against submarines. The Mark 24 achieved 18 to 22%, depending on which study you consulted, more than double the effectiveness. And unlike depth charges, which required precise positioning and timing, the acoustic torpedo corrected its own course after release. The pilot simply needed to drop it reasonably close to where the submarine had dived. By mid-1943, the weapon was being deployed from multiple aircraft types. PBY Catalinas and PB-4Y Liberators carried them on long-range patrol missions. But the primary platform in both the Atlantic and Pacific theaters was the TBF Avenger, a 3-man torpedo bomber that had proven far more versatile than anyone anticipated when it entered service in 1942. The Avenger was Grumman Aircraft's answer to the Navy's demand for a replacement for the obsolete Douglas TBD Devastator. It was a chunky, barrel-shaped aircraft, powered by a Wright R2620 Cyclone engine producing 1,900 horsepower. 3 crew members operated the aircraft: a pilot up front, a turret gunner manning a .50 caliber machine gun in an electrically powered dorsal turret, and a radioman bombardier who handled everything else: communications, radar operation when equipped, bomb aiming, and operation of a ventral .30 caliber machine gun for defense against fighters attacking from below. The Avenger's large internal weapons bay could carry a Mark 13 torpedo, up to 4 500-pound bombs, or, in the anti-submarine role, 2 depth bombs and 1 Mark 24 acoustic torpedo. Later variants included radar in a pod mounted under the right wing, and the aircraft could carry and deploy sonobuoys, expendable listening devices that transmitted underwater sounds back to the carrier or the aircraft itself. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The typical anti-submarine attack profile became standardized through trial, error, and the hard-won experience of pilots who survived their learning curve. When radar or visual contact located a surfaced submarine, the Avenger would approach at low altitude, attempting to achieve maximum surprise. Speed was critical. The longer the submarine crew had to react, the deeper they could dive before the attack commenced. If the submarine was still on the surface when the Avenger arrived, the pilot would illuminate the target with flares, then make a strafing run with the aircraft's forward-firing guns, attempting to kill crew members on the conning tower and damage the submarine's pressure hull or diving planes. The goal wasn't to sink the submarine with gunfire. The goal was to force an emergency crash dive while causing enough damage or confusion to slow the dive or create noise that the acoustic torpedo could track. As the submarine began its dive, leaving a swirl of disturbed water on the surface, the Avenger would drop depth bombs first. The standard Mark 54 depth bomb weighed 354 pounds and carried 92 pounds of Torpex explosive. These weapons were set to explode at predetermined depths, typically between 50 and 150 feet, creating massive shock waves that could rupture a submarine's pressure hull or damage critical systems. The depth bombs served multiple purposes. They might achieve a direct kill if the submarine was still shallow enough. They would certainly terrify the crew and potentially cause damage that would create more noise for the acoustic torpedo to track. And they provided immediate feedback about the submarine's location and course, because the explosion plumes and the sub's reaction to them revealed which direction the boat was heading. Immediately after dropping the depth bombs, the Avenger would deploy a sonobuoy, usually colored with distinctive dye markers, purple, orange, blue, red, yellow, to help identify which buoy was transmitting which signal. The sonobuoy would parachute into the water and begin transmitting underwater sounds back to the aircraft or the carrier. The pilot would circle, listening through headphones to the amplified sounds of propellers, machinery, the creaking of stressed metal, sometimes even the sound of sailors shouting inside the submarine as they fought to control their damaged boat. Using the sonobuoy signals and visual observation of where the submarine had dived, the pilot would estimate the target's current position and heading. Then came the critical moment, the release of the Mark 24. The torpedo had to be dropped close enough to the submarine's estimated position that its circular search pattern would intersect the target's path. Too far away and the torpedo would exhaust its battery before making contact. Too close to the Avenger's previous depth bomb explosions, and the weapon might home in on the residual bubble noise instead of the submarine itself. Pilots learned through experience and from the hard-won wisdom passed down from squadron to squadron. Drop the acoustic torpedo approximately 100 to 300 yards from where you estimate the submarine to be. If you've deployed sonobuoys and can hear the target, use the relative loudness of the sound from multiple buoys to triangulate position. If the submarine is running silent, trying to minimize noise signature, estimate based on its last known course and speed, factoring in that a damaged boat might be moving slower or maneuvering erratically. The Mark 24 would hit the water, dive to its search depth, and begin its circular hunt. The torpedo could maintain 12 knots for approximately 15 minutes, giving it a maximum range of about 4,000 yards, though effective range was considerably shorter. Once the acoustic signal from the submarine exceeded the threshold, the weapon would begin its final approach, spiraling inward on the sound source until impact. The statistics told the story of effectiveness, but they couldn't capture the terror experienced by submarine crews who found themselves being hunted by a weapon they couldn't see, couldn't hear approaching, and couldn't evade through any conventional means. German U-boat crews began reporting mysterious torpedo attacks that seemed to come from nowhere. Japanese submarine commanders filed similar reports. The attacks didn't follow the pattern of conventional submarine-launched torpedoes. There was no telltale wake on the surface, no sound of a torpedo motor approaching at high speed, just silence, followed by an explosion against the hull. Allied intelligence worked desperately to prevent any information about the acoustic torpedo from reaching Axis hands. Pilots were briefed under strict security protocols. They were told that discussing the weapon, even acknowledging its existence, could result in court-martial. Photographs of the Mark 24 were classified at the highest levels. When submarines were sunk by acoustic torpedoes, Official reports attributed the kills to depth charges or other conventional weapons. The deception was so successful that most German and Japanese submarine commanders went to their graves never understanding what had hunted them. This brings us back to Lieutenant Commander Jesse Taylor, circling in darkness over the mid-Atlantic on June 23, 1944, with a surfaced Japanese submarine in his sights and approximately 90 seconds before that submarine would dive beyond easy reach. The I-52 represented one of Japan's most ambitious wartime gambles. A Type C-3 modified cargo submarine, she displaced 3,600 tons surfaced, 4,760 tons submerged, 356 feet long, 38 feet wide, with a crew of 114 men. Her mission was extraordinary even by the standards of Japan's submarine force, which routinely attempted operations that other navies would consider impossible. She had departed Kure, Japan, on March 10, 1944, travelling to Singapore to load cargo. From there, she would attempt a transoceanic voyage to occupied France, carrying strategic materials desperately needed by Nazi Germany and picking up German technology that Japan could no longer develop independently. The cargo was staggering: 9.8 tons of molybdenum for armor plate production, 11 tons of tungsten for machine tools and ammunition, 2.2 tons of gold, 146 bars packed in 49 metal boxes, payment for German technology, 3 tons of raw opium, 54 kilograms of caffeine, and after loading in Singapore, 120 tons of tin, 59.8 tons of raw rubber, and 3.3 tons of quinine. The passengers were equally valuable: 14. Submarine, charged to readers and gauze with asiders. German advances in anti-aircraft weapons, radar technology, and torpedo boat engines. Technologies that Japan desperately needed as American forces pushed relentlessly across the Pacific, island by island, destroying the defensive perimeter that Japanese strategists had believed would protect the home islands indefinitely. Only 5 other submarines had attempted this intercontinental voyage during the war. The I-30 in April 1942, partially successful before being sunk by a mine. The I-8 in June 1943, which completed its mission. The I-34 in October 1943, sunk by the British submarine HMS Taurus. The I-29 in November 1943, sunk by the American submarine Sawfish with assistance from ultra-intelligence intercepts. And the German submarine U-511 in August 1943. The casualty rate for these missions exceeded 60%. The I-52's crew knew the odds. American signals intelligence had tracked the submarine's progress from the moment she departed Kure. Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor, the cryptanalysis unit that had helped win the Battle of Midway 2 years earlier, intercepted and decoded Japanese naval messages detailing the rendezvous coordinates. The I-52 would meet the German submarine U-530 in the mid-Atlantic. The U-boat would transfer fuel, a radar warning receiver, an Enigma cipher machine, and technical staff, including a German pilot who would guide the Japanese submarine through the treacherous Bay of Biscay and into the port at Lorient, France. The intelligence reached Admiral Jonas Ingram, commander of the U.S. Fourth Fleet, responsible for anti-submarine operations in the South Atlantic. Ingram immediately dispatched Task Group 22.3, built around the escort carrier USS Bogue. The Bogue was a converted merchant hull, one of the small carriers that sailors called jeep carriers or baby flat-tops. She displaced only 11,000 tons, carried 24 aircraft, and could make barely 18 knots at maximum speed. But she was available, her air group was experienced, and her squadron, Composite Squadron 69, had already sunk 11 U-boats in the Atlantic. Lieutenant Commander Jesse Taylor commanded VC-69. He was flying his personal TBF Avenger, Bureau number 24211, equipped with ANAPS-3 radar in a pod under the starboard wing, WWII deployment capability, and in his weapons bay, 2 Mark 54 depth bombs and 1 Mark 24 acoustic torpedo. His crew consisted of Chief Aviation Radioman Ed Whitlock operating the radar and radio, and Aviation Radioman Second Class R.P. Williams in the turret. The Bogue had received the intercept coordinates at approximately 1900 hours on June 22nd. By 2300 hours, Taylor and multiple other aircraft were airborne, searching the designated area. The night was moonless, with heavy cloud cover and occasional rain squalls. Radar was the only way to locate a surfaced submarine in these conditions. Whitlock had been scanning methodically, adjusting his scope settings to filter out sea return, the radar reflections from waves that could obscure a submarine's small radar signature. At 2340 hours, his patience was rewarded. A contact, approximately 6 miles away, showing the radar characteristics of a large submarine running on the surface. Taylor turned toward the contact, descending to attack altitude, approximately 300 feet. The Avenger's right cyclone engine thundered through the darkness, pushing the heavily loaded aircraft toward the target at 140 knots. The Japanese submarine was indeed the I-52. Commander Uno Kamio stood on the conning tower bridge with his watch officers and lookouts, scanning the night sea. The rendezvous with U-530 had occurred hours earlier. The German submarine had successfully transferred fuel, equipment, and personnel, including the German pilot, Lieutenant Commander Dietrich Mollenhauer. The U-boat had departed toward Trinidad. Now the I-52 was running southeast on the surface, making approximately 15 knots, recharging her batteries for the long submerged transit through U-boat hunting grounds as she approached the European coast. The radar detector installed by the Germans should have provided warning, but the ANAPS-3 radar that Taylor's Avenger carried operated at a wavelength the Japanese detector wasn't calibrated to recognize. The first indication that anything was wrong came from one of the stern lookouts, who reported seeing something, maybe just a darker patch against the dark sky, maybe an aircraft, maybe nothing. Commander Uno didn't hesitate. He'd survived this long by treating every uncertain contact as a threat. Alarm! Dive! 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 The klaxon sounded throughout the submarine. Lookouts tumbled down the conning tower ladder. The officer of the deck followed, dogging the upper hatch behind him. Down in the control room, sailors spun valve wheels, flooding ballast tanks with seawater. The diving planes angled downward. The electric motors, already turning slowly to maintain steerage way, increased speed to pull the submarine beneath the surface. A Japanese submarine of the I-52's type could crash dive in approximately 1 to 2 minutes with an experienced crew. Commander Uno's crew was very experienced. They'd been at sea for months, conducting the same emergency drill repeatedly. But they were also working with a submarine that displaced nearly 5,000 tons submerged, far larger and less agile than the smaller coastal boats that could dive in 30 seconds. Taylor saw the submarine at approximately the same moment the Japanese lookouts saw his aircraft. The dark shape on the surface, 350 feet long, the distinctive curve of the conning tower, Fairwater, the wake spreading behind the hull. He dropped a parachute flare. The flare ignited at approximately 700 feet altitude, casting harsh magnesium-white light across the ocean surface. The submarine was clearly visible, bow starting to dip as ballast tanks flooded, stern still on the surface, crew members scrambling to get below. Taylor lined up for his depth bomb run. The Avenger dove slightly, building speed, the bomb bay doors already open. Range, 500 yards, 400, 300. Taylor released both Mark 54 depth bombs. The weapons tumbled from the bay, falling toward the swirl of white water where the submarine had been seconds before. The depth bombs hit the water just to starboard of the submarine's hull. Taylor had led the target correctly, but the I-52 was diving faster than anticipated. The bombs were set to detonate at 75 feet depth. They sank rapidly, approximately 16 feet per second. Within 5 seconds, they reached their detonation depth and exploded. The underwater detonations created massive pressure waves. Each Mark 54 carried 92 pounds of Torpex, an explosive significantly more powerful than TNT. The shock waves propagated through the water at approximately 5,000 feet per second, far faster than sound travels through air. The submarine, now at approximately 50 feet depth and still descending, was caught at the edge of the blast radius. Inside the I-52, the crew felt and heard the explosions. A tremendous boom, followed by the shuddering of the entire hull, light bulbs shattering, equipment breaking loose from mountings, men thrown against bulkheads. Damage reports flooded into the control room. Minor flooding in the aft torpedo room. Hydraulic pressure loss on the port diving plane. Electrical problems throughout the boat. Nothing catastrophic, but enough damage to create noise. Leaking seals, pump motors running overtime, sailors shouting damage, reports to their section leaders. Taylor couldn't see the submarine anymore. It had vanished beneath the surface, leaving only a spreading patch of disturbed water and oil. But he had procedures to follow. Procedures developed through brutal trial and error over 2 years of anti-submarine warfare in the Atlantic. He deployed his first sonobuoy, colored purple, dropping it approximately 200 yards from where the submarine had dived. The sonobuoy hit the water, automatically activated its hydrophone, and began transmitting. Within seconds, Taylor's headphones filled with sound, the unmistakable thrashing of propellers, the whine of electric motors under load, pumps running, and fainter, the creaking and groaning of stressed metal. The submarine was heading southeast, approximately the same course it had been steering on the surface. Damaged but still under control, diving deeper, trying to escape, Taylor circled, deploying more sonobuoys in a pattern: orange, blue, red, yellow. Each buoy provided a piece of the acoustic puzzle. By comparing the relative loudness of the submarine's noise signature from different buoys, Taylor could triangulate the target's position and heading. Back on the Bogue, the carrier's operations center monitored the radio transmissions from Taylor's aircraft and from the sonobuoys. The tactical plot showed the submarine's estimated track. Orders went out to the escort destroyers to converge on the area, but they were miles away. This was Taylor's fight. He had one weapon remaining, the Mark 24 acoustic torpedo, the weapon that the Japanese submarine crew didn't know existed, couldn't anticipate, and had no defense against. Taylor circled once more, calculating. The submarine was heading southeast at an estimated 5 to 7 knots submerged. It was already at least 100 feet deep, possibly deeper. The damage from the depth bombs had slowed it slightly and was making it noisier than normal, which made it easier to track, but didn't make it any less dangerous to approach. Japanese submarines carried anti-aircraft guns, and if the I-52 decided to surface and fight, Taylor's lumbering Avenger would be vulnerable. He lined up his attack run, approaching from the port quarter, flying at 250 feet altitude, 125 knots airspeed. The weapons bay was open. The Mark 24 hung in its shackles, 680 pounds of the most sophisticated torpedo technology in the world, about to be released over a patch of empty ocean, where instruments and training and 2 years of hard experience said a submarine ought to be. Taylor released the weapon at 23:53 hours, 13 minutes after first radar contact. The torpedo dropped free, hit the water with a splash that Taylor saw briefly in his rearview mirror, and vanished beneath the surface. The Mark 24 dove immediately to its search depth, 150 feet, deeper than the original 50-foot setting used in early 1943. The weapon's pressure gauge, a simple bellows mechanism connected to the depth control system, verified the depth. The rudder centered, the propeller engaged, spinning at a steady rate that pushed the torpedo through the water at 12 knots. And the weapon began its circular search pattern, swimming in expanding arcs, listening. 4 piezoelectric hydrophones, mounted 90 degrees apart around the torpedo's midsection, detected pressure waves in the 24 kHz frequency range. Inside the torpedo, vacuum tubes amplified and processed the signals. The guidance computer, if you could call the analog circuitry a computer, compared the signal strength from each hydrophone. As long as all 4 hydrophones detected roughly equal noise levels, meaning no strong sound source in any particular direction, the torpedo maintained its circular search. The submarine was 300 yards away when the torpedo entered the water. At 12 knots, the torpedo covered 200 yards per minute. The submarine was traveling at approximately 6 knots, covering 100 yards per minute. The geometry of the situation meant that unless the submarine changed course radically or shut down its motors completely, the torpedo's search pattern would inevitably bring it within acoustic detection range. 60 seconds after the torpedo entered the water, the hydrophones detected an anomaly. The signal strength from the port side hydrophones increased, while the starboard side hydrophones detected weaker signals. The proportional guidance system engaged, the rudder deflected to port, the torpedo turned toward the source of the sound. Aboard the I-52, Commander Uno ordered silent running. All non-essential machinery shut down. The crew moved carefully, avoiding any noise. The electric motors reduced to minimum speed, barely maintaining steerage way. Pump stopped. Ventilation fans ceased. The submarine drifted through the dark water, trying to become invisible to whatever hunter was above them. But the damage from the depth bombs made true silence impossible. A seal somewhere in the after compartment was leaking seawater at a rate that required continuous pumping. The pump motor couldn't be silenced without allowing flooding that would eventually sink the boat. The damaged hydraulic system wheezed and hissed as pressure fluctuated, and the propellers, even turning at minimum speed, generated noise that propagated through the water for hundreds of yards. The torpedo heard all of it. The acoustic signature at 24 kHz was clear and distinct. The guidance system locked on. The circular search pattern transitioned to a direct homing run. The torpedo's propeller maintained steady speed. The rudder made continuous small corrections, keeping the weapon pointed at the loudest sound source. Range decreased. 300 yards, 200 yards, 100 yards. Inside the submarine, nobody. They heard the torpedo approaching. The weapon was too slow to generate the high-pitched whine of a conventional high-speed torpedo. The electric motor was too quiet to detect against the background noise of the submarine's own machinery. The first warning was the impact. The Mark 24 struck the I-52 on the port side, aft of the conning tower, at approximately frame 73. The proximity fuse, designed to detonate when the weapon came within close range of a large metal object, triggered the 92-pound HBX explosive charge. The explosion occurred at a depth of approximately 170 feet. The pressure wave propagated outward at 5,000 feet per second, faster than the steel hull could respond. The explosion ruptured the pressure hull over an area approximately 8 feet in diameter. Seawater, at 170 feet depth, carries approximately 75 pounds per square inch of pressure. That water rushed through the ruptured hull into the submarine's interior at devastating speed. The after-engine room flooded in seconds. Sailors caught in that compartment had no chance to escape. The watertight door between the engine room and the maneuvering room held temporarily, but the shock had damaged bulkhead penetrations and fractured piping. Water sprayed through a dozen small leaks. The maneuvering room crew tried to dog the next watertight door, but the pressure differential was too great. Water pushed the door open, flooding the next compartment. In the control room, Commander Uno knew immediately that his submarine was dying. The depth gauge showed the boat sinking stern first, despite full rise on the diving planes. Electrical power fluctuated as the salt water reached battery compartments, creating chlorine gas. The submarine passed 200 feet depth, 250 feet, 300 feet. The hull groaned under the increasing pressure. Rivets popped loose with sounds like gunfire. More leaks appeared. The submarine's test depth, the maximum depth rated for safe operation, was 360 feet. They passed that depth at approximately 23:56 hours, 3 minutes after the torpedo impact. At 390 feet, a major bulkhead failed. The ocean rushed through the submarine, flooding compartments faster than any damage control party could respond. Men trapped in flooded compartments hammered on watertight doors that couldn't be opened without flooding the entire boat. Other men drowned at their duty stations, trying until the last second to save their ship. The I-52 struck the ocean floor at 17,000 feet depth, 5,240 meters down, settling upright in the soft sediment. The pressure at that depth exceeded 7,500 pounds per square inch. The submarine's hull, designed for a maximum depth of 360 feet, crumpled like paper. Everyone aboard died, either from drowning during the descent or from the catastrophic hull collapse when the submarine hit bottom. Taylor heard the death of the I-52 through his sonobuoy receivers. The explosion of the torpedo, the sound of breaking metal, the rush of water. Then, gradually, silence. He circled for another 40 minutes, listening, watching for any sign of survivors or debris. Nothing appeared. At 01:15 hours on June 24th, Taylor returned to the bogue. His aircraft had been airborne for more than 2 hours. Another pilot, Lieutenant Junior Grade William Flash Gordon, relieved him on patrol, accompanied by a civilian underwater sound expert named Pricefish. Gordon dropped additional sonobuoys and listened for hours, but heard nothing except, unknowingly, the propeller sounds of the German U-530 20 miles away, transmitted through an underwater sound channel that carried noise for vast distances. In the morning, the destroyer USS Janssen reached the site and found flotsam, a ton of raw rubber floating on the surface, a piece of silk cloth, and human remains. The sonobuoy recordings from that night survived in the National Archives in Washington, stored in thin film canisters marked Gordon Wire No. 1 and Gordon Wire No. 2. The recordings from Taylor's attack were never found in official archives, though a set of 78 RPM vinyl records containing segments of Taylor's wire recordings was located years later. In 1995, a civilian salvage expedition led by Paul Tidwell located the wreck of the I-52 at precisely 15 degrees 16 minutes north latitude, 39 degrees 55 minutes west longitude. The submarine rests upright on the ocean floor at 17,000 feet depth. Her conning tower is intact. Her hull number is still visible on the side of the fairwater. The bow section shows damage from impact with the bottom. A large hole, approximately 8 feet across, is visible aft of the conning tower on the port side, consistent with the torpedo impact location. The Japanese government officially considers the wreck site a war grave. The salvage team followed proper procedures, working with Japanese authorities, and affixed a Japanese naval ensign to the wrecked submarine. A metal box from the debris field was recovered, hoped to contain some of the gold cargo. Instead, it contained opium. The gold, worth approximately $25 million in 1995 currency, remains with the wreck at the bottom of the Atlantic. The sinking of the I-52 represented one of 37 submarine kills credited to the Mark 24 acoustic torpedo during World War II. 31 German U-boats and 6 Japanese submarines fell victim to the weapon. Another 18 submarines, 15 German and 3 Japanese, were damaged but survived. Out of 204 Mark 24 torpedoes fired at submarines during the war, 37 achieved kills, an effectiveness rate of approximately 18%. Compare that to conventional aerial depth charges, which achieved approximately 9.5% effectiveness, and the acoustic torpedo's advantage becomes clear. But the statistics don't capture the psychological impact on submarine crews who survived encounters with the weapon. German U-boat commanders filed increasingly desperate reports about mysterious torpedo attacks that seemed to track their submarines even when running silent. Japanese submarine captains reported similar experiences. Neither Axis power fully understood what they faced until after the war ended and classified documents were declassified. The Mark 24 remained classified until well after 1945. The U.S. Navy continued using variants of the weapon until 1948. Wartime photographs of the torpedo are extremely rare. Even the name FIDO, the informal nickname used by development teams, was classified. Pilots who flew with the weapon were prohibited from discussing it under threat of court-martial. When submarines were sunk by acoustic torpedoes, official reports attributed the kills to conventional depth charges or other weapons, maintaining the deception that had proven so effective. The 90 seconds that gave this story its title represents the critical window between detection and escape. A well-trained submarine crew could initiate a crash dive in 30 seconds after receiving the alarm. Within 90 seconds, the submarine could reach 100 feet depth, where it became significantly harder to attack with conventional weapons. But the Mark 24 changed that calculus completely. The acoustic torpedo didn't care how deep the submarine dove, as long as it remained within the weapon's search depth and was making enough noise to be detected. Diving for safety, the instinctive response to aircraft attack, actually made submarines more vulnerable to acoustic torpedoes, because diving meant running the electric motors at high power, which generated more noise. The only effective defense was to surface and run, but that required knowing about the slow speed of the torpedo, and that information was precisely what Allied security services worked so hard to conceal. Commander Uno Cameo made the tactically correct decision based on the information available to him. He dove when he detected the aircraft. He went deep to escape the depth bombs. He ordered silent running to avoid detection. Every decision followed standard doctrine for submarine commanders facing air attack. Every decision was exactly what the acoustic torpedoes designers had anticipated submarine commanders would do. The technology that killed the I-52 represented a revolution in anti-submarine warfare. For the first time in history, a weapon existed that could track and kill a submerged submarine without requiring precise knowledge of the target's position. The pilot simply needed to drop the torpedo reasonably close to where the submarine had dived. The weapon would find the target on its own, guided by the sounds that every submarine inevitably made while operating underwater. This capability fundamentally changed the balance of power between submarines and aircraft. Before the Mark 24, submarines had a reasonable chance of escaping air attack by diving quickly and running silent. After the Mark 24, diving only delayed the inevitable unless the submarine could escape the torpedo's search radius before its battery expired. The psychological impact on submarine crews was devastating. They were being hunted by an invisible, relentless predator that didn't tire, didn't give up, and couldn't be fooled by conventional evasion tactics. The acoustic torpedo's development also demonstrated how quickly military technology could advance when necessity demanded innovation. From the first meeting at Harvard's Underwater Sound Laboratory in December 1941 to operational deployment in March 1943 was barely 15 months. During that time, multiple organizations coordinated to solve problems in acoustics, electronics, hydrodynamics, and weapons integration that had seemed nearly impossible at the project's beginning. The success of the Mark 24 influenced post-war weapons development significantly. Every modern anti-submarine torpedo uses some form of acoustic homing, though the guidance systems are far more sophisticated than the vacuum tube technology of 1943. The basic principle remains unchanged. Listen for the target, turn toward the sound, close the distance, detonate. Lieutenant Commander Jesse Taylor received credit for sinking the I-52, though post-war analysis suggested that both Taylor and Lieutenant Gordon should share credit, since Gordon dropped a second torpedo at the location hours later. The distinction matters little to the 114 men who died aboard the submarine. They never reached Nazi Germany. The gold never funded German weapons programs. The Japanese technicians never studied German anti-aircraft technology. The mission failed completely, another entry in the growing list of Japanese strategic defeats as American forces pushed inexorably toward the home islands. The I-52 was one of 6 Japanese submarines sunk by Mark 24 acoustic torpedoes during the war. The other 5 were sunk in various locations across the Pacific and Atlantic theaters. Each sinking followed a similar pattern: aircraft detection, depth bomb attack, acoustic torpedo release, explosion, silence. The Japanese submarine force, already stretched desperately thin by mid-1944, could not afford these losses. Every submarine that failed to return meant one less boat available for the defense of the Philippines, for supply missions to isolated garrisons, for the desperate kamikaze-style attacks that Japanese naval doctrine increasingly emphasized as conventional operations, became impossible. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, Check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.